Good afternoon. With the magnificent Lok Satta building staircase in the vicinity, a striking symbol of Art Deco architecture, it is my pleasure to take you on a one-of-a-kind journey, one that goes back into the past with a foot in the present and maybe the future. Glamorous and vintage in equal dose, evoking the glorious times in a modern way. Welcome everybody. My name is Asad Lalji. On behalf of Avid Learning, we're delighted you're here with us today. The inspiration for this talk was actually that staircase in the Lok Satta building. A couple of months ago, I stumbled on it when we had come here for a recce. And it was this beautiful staircase that I saw, and I took my team to see it the next week. And when we went there, the wooden banisters from the staircase was missing. The third week when we went back, it was plastered with distemper paint of some garish color. And that got me thinking, there are such jewels of architecture that are dotted around our city, and to start thinking about and having conversations about them. So this talk is actually inspired by that staircase as almost like an homage to it. And we in fact didn't have any pictures, so that image was a very bad picture I took on my phone with no light. So Start India Foundation, the Ghoda Arts Festival, Avid Learning presents Motifs, Materials and Markers of Art Deco Architecture. A unique panel discussion with some of the biggest names in design, architecture, and the visual arts. This conversation is a continuation of Avid Learning's much appreciated full-day workshop organized last November. The recordings are available on Avid's YouTube channel. Avid Learning's romance with Art Deco is no secret. Enamored by its charm, Avid, since its inception, has treasured the impact of Art Deco motifs, decoded and demystified the people, the places, the faces behind this movement, and we've traced and celebrated this through walks, workshops, and series. We're proud to bring together two iconic and city festivals, the Mumbai Urban Arts Festival, which you are at, and the Ghoda Arts Festival, which is opening today. So you all must go there in big numbers and support it. Today's session is one such effort that goes beyond appreciating Art Deco architectural heritage and tackles issues of restoring, preserving the buildings and bringing them back into conversational parlance, stretching beyond architecture of the magnificent buildings into the interiors of our homes and passage of time, transcending traditions. Please join your hands and welcome our esteemed panelists. Vice Chairman, Bharat Floorings and Tiles, Firdos Varaiwala. Principal Architect, Nikhil Mahashru, and our associates and founder, Walkitecture. Independent photographer and curator, Akshay Mahajan. And they will be in conversation with our moderator, visual artist and founder, Editions Jojo, Kamna Patel. Over to you, Kamna, and look forward to a fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Asad, and thank you, Avid Learning, Ghoda Foundation, and Mumbai Urban Arts Festival for having us here today. My name is Kamna, and I'll be moderating the panel today with our lovely panelists. As Asad mentioned, today's talk is in continuation with Avid Learning's ongoing series on Art Deco in Mumbai called Motifs, Materials, and Makers of Art Deco Architecture. If you haven't been following it, I highly recommend their YouTube playlist to learn more about the history and the evolution of the movement in India. It is in the same spirit that our panelists today will take you along on their individual journeys with Art Deco, both in their personal and their professional lives. My job description, so to speak, is that of a visual artist and a bookmaker. And as a citizen of the city and an inhabitant of one of the densest Art Deco districts here, my role as a panelist today is that of a Mumbaikar. So we'll try and draw out some of the anecdotes, ask the questions I've always wanted to know the answers to, while thinking about the future of the style in contemporary India and exploring ways to preserve its legacy and all the memories it carries. So, what does Art Deco mean? To me, Art Deco means birthdays, weddings, ceremonies, playing, growing, aging. Art Deco shapes the memories of generations of my family. Many times when I'm looking at the past, the details of these spaces, which is the living room of my mother's house, the flooring in that house, the railings of that house, the balconies of my neighbor's house, the light fixtures, they all show up in the images of my mind, quietly forming the backdrop to the major events in my life and also the major events in the lives of the kin that came before me. So my relationship with Art Deco is the gash on my knee from a weathered terrazzo terrace, or the rounded stairway that my brother and I used to use as a playground, or the front panels of the building that face the sea that Mr. Ogle decided to paint blue and have fish drawn on it because it was responding to the location of that building. My family moved to Mumbai from Gujarat in the 1930s, around the same time that Shivaji Park was being developed as a residential neighborhood to decentralize the population from the fort area. And this also happened to be the time that Art Deco was peaking in India. In her book on Shivaji Park, Shanta Gokhale talks about the park as being a democratic space where people of all ages and cultures meet and share the katta for their evening chats, exercising, stealing kisses, playing music, having a meal, taking a nap, and just living, and oftentimes living their private lives outdoors. And so this is the Art Deco of my memory, a democratic style inhabited by a growing middle class. Art Deco started as a symbol of prosperity and very soon became synonymous with the democratic reimagining of a modern Indian identity. So this is an image of one of the iconic Art Deco bungalows in Shivaji Park. And the story goes that Mr. Rawat, one of 3 siblings who used to live here, had a childhood sweetheart. And as life would have it, she got married, she moved away. Mr. Rawat continued to live in the bungalow, and he actually became an active voice in the community, campaigning for Shivaji Park to be a silent zone, campaigning for political rallies to stop there. And as life would have it, many years later she had children, and eventually she was widowed. After which Mr. Rawat and her reconnected, and at the age of 75 they married each other, and they now live outside of the city on a farm, and this bungalow still exists. And I think one of his siblings live here. The other story is that this bungalow has the only mango tree that still bears fruit in season, and they actually distribute it to the neighbors when the mangoes are in season. And my mother grew up 2 buildings down from this bungalow, and when they were kids, she and her siblings would kind of scale the low walls which is so iconic of these Art Deco buildings, and pick mulberries from the tree that was in their yard until they were chased away. So to me, Art Deco really is about tying these generations together. It's very much about the people that occupy these spaces, the community that is built around it, and one that is shaped by it. Today we find ourselves in a time of major shifts, and a reimagination of an Indian identity is being called upon once again. Identifying and preserving heritage in all its plurality allows us to represent the diversity of our history, and this serves as a kind of immunity against one perspective narratives. So coming back to the words of Shanta Gokhale, she writes about the row of Art Deco buildings that face the Oval Maidan and says that they look as though they've come out of the same mold, giving the area, and I quote, an elegant but rigid appearance, whereas the buildings around Shivaji Park are highly individualistic, lending it a strong appearance of a free and easy space, unquote. So we took a colonial import, we made it our own, shaped and molded it to represent a new India. Just like the buildings around Shivaji Park, one that is highly individualistic, strong and free. And I see an urgent need for Art Deco in India to be embraced and preserved as symbolic of a secular democracy. Our panelists in today's discussion have all played their part in engaging with, propelling, resuscitating and preserving the architectural style. As in the case of Firdos and Bharat Flooring and Tiles, whose contribution in pioneering and also reviving Art Deco flooring shows up in iconic buildings like Metro Cinema. Or the restoration and revival of Art Deco buildings like Harpal House by Nikhil Mahashur alongside his pedagogic endeavor called Walkitecture. Or in the exploration of histories and cultural contexts of the style, and in the building of an archive, like in the case of Akshay Mahajan with his photography and writing. So on that note, I would like to start today's discussion by inviting our panelists to share with us a little more about their individual practices and perhaps locating it in your relationship with Art Deco and also the city of Bombay. So I'll start with Firdaus.
Thank you guys all for coming here on a Saturday, and I'm sure it must have taken a lot of effort and really appreciate it. So, can I have the clicker? Sorry. So, as you know, Bharat Floorings is a 100-year-old company which started during the freedom movement, and we actually turned 100 years in May. And one of the interesting things about Bharat Floorings is that the company's history is tied into the history of India. Like, what happened in the company is very closely linked. It's like the story of India is told through a company. So starting with the first styles that were produced were these very anglicized styles which were Victorian in nature, very European, and the audience for them was the European audience, the anglicized Indians as well, who were looking for something which was European in taste. And so Bharat tiles started during the freedom movement and managed to push out the Minton tiles that were being imported from England at that time by making the same patterns in cement and combining the motifs into one. But let's just say that something really huge was about to happen in the country and in the company. So what happened was that even though it produced these tiles, by 1930, there is absolutely no record of those anglicized tiles being made because Indians had developed a sense of pride. They wanted to use local materials. Kamna, you said that Art Deco was colonial, but I think that the aspiration in those days was not colonial. It was about getting something that was international, which had no ties to the Europeans. It was more American and America's democracy and freedoms that I think Indians related to and which they aspired to in their own buildings. So if you look at all these testimonials and things from that period, suddenly there's this massive shift where you're not making those fancy pattern tiles anymore, you're making Art Deco. And this even went on to the Mantralaya, which was built later on, where they basically made the Mantralaya with this stated goal of using indigenous materials. So you can sense the pride and the excitement that was there in Indians at that time to basically use a local material, use local designs, and not copy the West anymore. So these are just some of the ads that we have from the 1920s and 1930s, which show the kind of buildings that were being done in those days. And while the buildings were very grand, but the material was terrazzo or marble. Because terrazzo or marble was something which was quick to be produced and which was highly customizable. You could use very simple materials to make very complex and beautiful patterns. So instead of having those very ornate patterns in one tile, now the whole floor became a pattern. So I'm going to go a little bit into that. So if you look at the uses of Art Deco and marble, which also Bharat tiles did, so if you see there's like beautiful geometry, there are really large what do you call them, mosaics which were laid on the floor. And you can see on the right hand side, can anyone guess what building this is? This one. This one. It still stands at Fort. It's a bank. It's the HSBC bank. So basically when banks started to come up and we had our own independent banks and they were making a lot of money, they were to show people that we have taste and elegance and we are like so cool that we are going to use this imported marble and make our lobbies and things with it. So, but however in residences, Indians still, as today, display a sense of fun, vivaciousness, and have adapted this international style in a very Indian way. With these, so if you see like this Mondrian-like floor, which is there at Dhanraj Mahal, or the court view, the way that even the patterns were laid out, they kind of were pointing. If you see these points here, go up the stairs here. This is the way to go down to the other side. So they actually used the patterns in very interesting ways as well to show how people could walk and as like signage almost. So these are like some more Art Deco projects that were used. And I'm very happy to say that these materials are so enduring that these are all recent photographs. These are not archive photographs. These are like from, I think my colleague Komal has taken them last year. So I'm really happy to see that people have preserved their flaws and they're still as enduring and beautiful as they are. This is just a cute little anecdote which we found that you don't need a PlayStation if you have a Bharat flaws in your house. But now the great thing is that this material, the terrazzo material, is coming back in a very contemporary way. So these two are very contemporary uses of the same material and being made to again make beautiful artworks on the floor, including with lights. And if you see on the right hand side, there's an Art Deco kind of theme to this floor as well. Also interesting is that the European patterns are also making a comeback. I think we've gotten over our colonial hangover and now we're like, that stuff was cool. We should try using it again. So you can see that these are all the pattern tiles coming back. So with that, I'll leave you guys and give it to my next speaker.
Hi. Usually we're up on Sunday morning because of architecture. We're up early in the morning, so I don't know how I'm going to be at 11 in the morning. Usually I'm more of a morning person on Sundays. But I'll just tell you all how I started architecture. I think my practice started off with a lot of glass buildings and then went on to heritage buildings thereafter. So this is architecture, where every morning on a Saturday or a Sunday we take out architect enthusiasts for a walk and make them look up instead of down or sideways. Make them look up and look at the building details on the top. But how did it start? Was quite funny because it actually started out on a run. I was this guy who looked at only glass buildings once I graduated out. I thought glass buildings is the way to go. Zero sustainability knowledge. So it started off with going on a run on Marine Drive. I used to stay at Shivaji Park and, as Kamna said that Shivaji Park is the hub of Art Deco. Not many people know about it. I kind of look at it as food. Marine Drive and Oval Maidan is like pizza. You grow up with it, you love it. The buildings at Mohammad Ali Road are like biryani. You take some time to like it, and then it has to be, you start loving it because there's smaller things that you see on the flyover. And the ones at Shivaji Park are like simple Indian Maharashtrian food, where not many people know about it. But once you start liking it, you start loving it. Because unfortunately, though Shivaji Park is the largest ground in Bombay, not many know of it as the largest ground in Bombay. Everyone thinks it would be Oval Maidan or Azad Maidan. But every building around Shivaji Park is one of the most beautiful Art Deco buildings. It's not in your face. It's not Art Deco where you'll know it's Art Deco. But if you look at it and observe the smaller nuances of the buildings in Shivaji Park, it's absolutely fantastic. So I'm inviting all of you all to come to Shivaji Park and look at it instead of only doing Oval Maidan and
for the Shivaji Park Art Festival.
Shivaji Park Arts Festival with the food mela. So it started off because I used to run on Marine Drive, and every time I used to keep the building as a reference because there are about 40 buildings there, and every time I used to run and wanted to collapse while running, I used to take a reference of a building and say, no, I'll do one more building. I'll do one more building and then I'll cross the signal. And that's when, I started observing these buildings, and that's when I started loving it. I did a couple of lectures in college, and then my principal used to send random people to me and say, Nikhil, just take them on a walk and get them to understand Bombay. And used to do that. And then I remember the day architecture started was when we had a talk on a Friday evening, and we had a walk on a Saturday morning, and we had about 25 registrations for the talk and the walk. And the person who had organized the talk had arranged this lovely food and iced tea, etc. for the talk. And I was very excited talking about Ghoda's, architecture. And I had only one person turn up for the talk. And because that person had come from Bhayandar, I had to actually sit and explain the whole talk to this one person. And I was totally distraught, and I said that, it was like an ego, it really hit my ego. To give a lecture to just one person, imagining you're like this big shot architect now, and suddenly, but it's just more talking. So, and I was totally devastated. And I said, Bombay people don't want to know more about Bombay. But the person who was organizing it said, just go the next morning, go for the walk, maybe someone might come. And amazingly, we had 28 people that came in for the walk, and I realized that no one in Bombay wants to hear, no one has the time to hear, but everyone wants to just see things. And that's when we realized that architecture is best shown than spoken about. And that's the beauty of what what architecture is all about. So this is the building that actually started off architecture, because maybe partially Art Deco, but it's got a mix. It's as what Ghoda would be. It's like an eclectic piece of architecture. And of course, it's got Bharat tiles. No building in Bombay which has anything to do with heritage has to have Bharat tiles in it. So we put a bad photo of Bharat tiles, but the tiles are really nice. The photo is not very good, but I had to do that. And if you see, there are a few motifs that we've taken from the, what the old building was. It's called Harpal House. It's right near, so it's popularly where people will eat Ayub's rolls and park their cars. So the next time you go and have a roll at Ayub's, if you look up, you'll see Harpal House. So when we were doing this building, we realized we were struggling a lot, because of course it was the first time that I was doing a heritage building, and we were wondering where are we going to get the kind of details from. And then one day we realized that the real heroes of all these projects are the makers, are the people in the shops in Mohammad Ali Road and Gulalwadi. One of our glass contractors told us that, why don't you just explore the area? Being architects, being from an architectural school in Bombay, we would never really go to a shop in Mohammad Ali Road. We were more into paper markets and stationery markets, but you would never go to a market that actually, where you would get these kind of details being made. And we went there, and we went to Mohammad Ali Road, we went to Gulalwadi, and we realized that these are the real heroes of any building that we do in Bombay, and without these guys, it's totally incomplete. You can just walk on that lane, and if you're doing an heritage building, you'll find each and everything that you need on a building in these things. And when we come and we talk about a lot about vernacular architecture, which is Bombay's architecture, which is very local, these guys are that traditional architecture heroes, because what is traditional architecture is knowledge passed down through generations. And these guys have that. They've got the same thing that they've been doing for maybe 100 years in their shop. They've got these railings, they've got these details, they've got these small windows that we can actually buy of them. And a little to digress is, we call this urban vernacular, where in a rural vernacular you have artisans and people, the owners actually trade, it's a barter system. But in an urban vernacular, it's the owner that hires these artisans, and and that's why the building in an urban vernacular context will look much more prettier only if you hire these guys to kind of make it look the way it is. And that's what we do. That's what architecture does, is that now that all these buildings all over Bombay are looking so pretty day by day, I think maybe 20 years back, these buildings didn't look as beautiful as what they do today. And this is what we show them on the walk. We make them look up, as I said, and show them these smaller details. And I'm trying to do that in Shivaji Park. Come now.
Thank you so much for that, Nikhil. That was really amazing. Akshay, over to you.
A friend once pointed out to me that architecture can function as a sculptural representation of failed futures. Our surroundings give us clues to where we have been and where we are going. And Art Deco for me was one such lens to look at the city. And what interests my camera is this sense of the city, these everyday anachronisms, where Bombay of the 19th century, 20th century, and Mumbai of the 21st century sit side by side as this kind of layer cake of visual discrepancies. So this is a photograph I took at the JJ Sculpture Department. And I think this kind of talks about that layering. You can see the different histories. On the top of the shelf, you see this very European, classical, Renaissance era sculptures. But at the edges, you'll find some tendencies towards modernism. And in this shelf, you start seeing Ajanta, Ellora, and the kind of Indianization, orientalization towards a kind of Indian form. So Art Deco, as some of my panelists have already mentioned, came about in these sort of roughly 2 decades that bracketed independence. And obviously the districts of Oval Maidan and Marine Drive, Queen's Necklace are much talked about. Obviously Shivaji Park, where Kamna grew up. But also the suburban estates of Dadar and Matunga, where I spent my childhood and beyond. And these buildings, these designs, locations, their condition, their names. There's one particular building next to Dadar station called Railview, which I always find funny. Railview, yeah. And now what replaces them and what they conceal records histories and gesture towards one-time paths forward. So before I pick up a camera to shoot this essence of this era, I wanted to see this era through the eyes of someone from that time. And this was this time of jazz, of spontaneity, of improvisation. Bombay was home to several polymaths. There was Dr. Homi Bhabha, who's not only Nobel Prize nominated scientist, but also this savant artist. I mean, Dr. Ambedkar, who himself lived in an Art Deco house. And one of the projects I came across was this project by this historian, Rachel Lee. It's called Metro Mod, which looked at European immigrants who had kind of escaping Nazi prosecution, made Bombay their home. And this created this really interesting Bombay mix of these European architects, theater people, photographers, mixing with public intellectuals and artistic intellectuals in Bombay, and spurring and galvanizing this interesting mixed kind of conversation, which spurred a lot of things like the Bombay Progressives and the great shows at the Bombay Art Society. And one such person was this guy called Ian Schaefer, who arguably is one of the first authors of probably the first modern photo book in Bombay. And this was a kind of travelogue, part travelogue, part photo book. It also had some bar reviews and restaurant reviews, advertisements. And Mr. Schaefer would walk the streets of Bombay with his very lightweight Rolleiflex and take pictures on the street. And the then municipal commissioner lauded the unconventional viewpoints that Mr. Schaefer was interested in. And it was something that really speaks to me because as someone 100 years later, I do the same thing. I take my camera around and appreciate these unconventional viewpoints. And sometimes even, as you can see here, almost scene to scene, as the one you can see around. So obviously this kind of talks about this era of, the first edition of Marg magazine here. And you can see how architecture and art is presented as this kind of dreamscape for modern India. And one of the things that I started looking at was how do you capture this time 100 years later. And as someone who is self-exiled Bombay wala, my modern interactions with the city are in hotels, the Yacht Club, and friends' apartment at Suleiman Chamber. And now I've become this kind of transient Bombay wala who can pick and choose where he lives.
Only lives in Art Deco buildings.
Huh?
Only lives in Art Deco buildings.
Yeah, so I decided that I'm going to inhabit one such Art Deco building and make it one of the subjects. And this is the Sea Green, the twin Art Deco building, Sea Green and Sea Green South. And I checked myself in, and I started taking these clandestine, I don't think anybody knows, images of my short stays at the hotel. So these are the corridors and the teal interiors. There's obviously some changes with time, but some of the kind of era of the vibe is still there. And this took on they took on sort of, each one became a collage, and each collage was a letter to a room at the Sea Green. So let me read out, one such letter. Room 401. I have spent many a night in a hotel with a famous ghost. At Ambos Mundos, meaning both worlds, Havana, we honeymooned in room 513, next door to 511. Hemingway slept, his long sleep spilling his last daiquiri. Our room smelt eerily fruity. Who knows which heads had lain upon the pillows before us? Grasping death's hand is one sort of company, a way of knowing one is not alone in time. On a January morning in 1948, a man checked into room number 6 at the Sea Green Hotel under an alias. His 3-night stay was marked with many curious comings and goings and the procurement of a Beretta M1934. He would fly to Delhi the next day, and Gandhi had 13 days to live. In room 401, one finds solace in that people have been here before. These walls have borne witness to a gamut of human emotions, machinations, friendships, great loves, and loss. Last night, returning inebriated, that teal and beige corridor loomed labyrinthian. As the clock struck midnight, I was half hoping to take a wrong turn and find myself in the 1950s. Perhaps I'd chance upon a young Captain Mahindra who'd go on to become my grandfather. Then, a recently returned from the war, seeking hedonism in Bombay's jazz age. Music spills into the pavements of Churchgate Road, while we sip a cappuccino sweetened with bootlegged rum from Hip Flask. Still, we stumble back to his apartment on the first floor of the mustard yellow Moti Mahal, only for drunken dreams to lift. I sink into my bed at the Sea Green, seeing more apparitions everywhere. My mind wanders to a childhood memory of an apartment in Queen's Court. My father's boarder, when he first arrived in Bombay, Mrs. Dorothy Ganapati, held court over a large drawing room decorated like Bombay as melange, a mix of influences combining colonial and modern Art Deco. Maybe it's a childhood misremembering, but it was an effortlessly postmodern assemblage of object arts and neoclassicism. The main subject of this echo was Mrs. Ganapati herself, the dedicatee to Paul Scott's The Raj Quartet books, the best of hostesses. I can quite grasp her face, but there is this lingering fragrance on some flacon of intricately cut glass. They were the generation, now long past, that erected these buildings in a quest for the modern, or perhaps a sign of enthusiasm for a newly found freedom. So many phantoms. Is it any wonder half of Bombay is preoccupied with feeding crows? The crow symbolizes an ancient rhythm, that which links this world of the living to that of a deceased ancestor. There is a shop somewhere in the western suburbs that specializes in selling farsan exclusively for feeding crows. The BMC issued a notice asking denizens not to feed corvids fried snacks. the people rebelled, saying authorities cannot stop them from feeding birds from their balconies. For a city that is hardly ever nostalgic, always valuing the new over the old, Bombay shore is obsessed with ghosts.
Thank you so much, Akshay. I really love this idea of ghosts and the fact that the living world is tying us to our ancestors, and actually Art Deco fits in so perfectly there. You know, it is really a sign of everything that's gone before, and one just has to be sensitive to it to be able to experience your own history by just looking at these relics of a past. And we'll come back to the Sea Green Hotel work that you did, because I want to know a lot more about it. But first I'm going to ask Nikhil a question about his work, and just coming back to this, your practice and how it ties in with both restoration as well as building new buildings in the style of Art Deco. And what are some of the challenges you might have faced in this? So, for example, you know, what are some of the responses that you've had when people have asked you to build new buildings and you say, I'm going to make a new Art Deco building? And maybe you can also touch upon some of the architectural details that you've noticed that belong to the older buildings that may not translate into the newer ones you're building. And yeah, just take us through some of the aspects of your practice.
Yeah, I'll take you through my work and then probably explain that through, I think, 2 or 3 projects that I've got.
Great.
But varied responses and funny ones as well. But I think we can have that. So I'm just going to touch upon one of our projects in Udaipur quickly. But why it was important in today's context was that though it looks like a very classical building, we quickly realized that when we're making a palace, we're making a palace with that looked very traditional. But the best way to bind modern and traditional architecture is with Art Deco. So what we've done is, though if you've ever seen the Umaid Bhavan in Jodhpur, you would realize that it's a very modern traditional building, and we've tried to do that in ours as well. So from a distance, it does look as if it is a very first Art Deco buildings, correct, and as popular as the Maharaja of Indore's interiors. But these two were the primary ways of starting Art Deco in India. And we tried to take influences of that and added a little of Mewar's architecture onto it. And if you see the building, it's actually built like a palace. If you see the photo on the cornermost on the right-hand side, you'll realize that we're building it like a palace, but we've started it from the scratch. We've started it from the ground. But what's most important is that what we don't really see much in Bombay today, and what Rajasthan sees a lot, is the work of the local artisan. So today in Bombay, when you talk about artists, they're mainly laborers. We don't really regard them or respect them as artists. But you know, when we're working in Rajasthan, it's absolutely cool, because you know, you go to site and there are these workers taking a marble slab, and they're tick 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 tick. They're going through the day and carving out these lovely ticklies through and making these lovely arches, and it's so amazing that you go there and you've got hundreds of people, and they're real artists who are actually working on site in the sun and creating these works of wonder, which today we would just finish in RCC in Bombay. When we say preservation, I feel that giving these artists work as architects becomes our sole responsibility. And instead of calling them laborers, and you call them artists, and you give them that kind of respect, I think I love what the people in Rajasthan do, and I think it'll be great if we could learn from it. Because when we preserve, it's mainly, even if we preserve an Art Deco, we have a carpenter or a civil person who we would call a kadia to do our Art Deco work. So I think even to encourage these small things, it's important for us in our field. So one of the interior works that we did, and if you see the building on the side, and you see this is Kapoor Mahal on Marine Drive. And if you even go and see the building now, the amount of opposition we would have in the building to not convert, or rather even stemming from the client to not convert a balcony into a room, was tremendous. Because all these Art Deco buildings on Marine Drive, if you see old photos and then go and look at it today, you would find that they've all been boxed up with sliding windows. And the balconies have been taken inside for a want of a larger room. And, usually on an Art Deco building, the older buildings, you would never see a pipe running on the external side, because Art Deco was to solve Bombay's sanitation problem. Every courtyard was built so that the toilets would be on the courtyard side. But for the want and our greed of wanting an attached bathroom to our bedroom, we've got pipes running through the building. So it has been a challenge to actually convince the client that, look, you don't need an extra balcony taken into your bedroom, but it also requires the client to understand that. And we were very fortunate that the client did understand that and allowed us to do it. But we didn't do too much, because I figured that they would eventually, after 2 or 3 years, do the place up again and do what they've resisted doing right now. But if you look at it, small things, we've actually maintained the portholes, which was again one of the most beautiful things in an Art Deco buildings. If you walk across Marine Drive and if you look on the sides of the building, most of the windows would be inspired by the ship windows, and there'll be all these lovely, beautiful portholes. Unfortunately, these portholes are in the toilet or in the bathroom, which makes the client want to resist keeping them, because they don't really want a large circular window in their bathroom. Also, if you look, detailing out the smaller windows in the balconies, I think it's on the earlier slide. But ours, when we did our interior project and we finished it, we realized that ours was the only one. We didn't do too much, but we were very proud of it, because when we walked across on the other side of the road, and we realized that we must be the only ones who'd actually preserved that Art Deco detail on that building. But ours actually stuck out like a sore thumb, because everyone else had these fancy glass windows and ours had a balcony, which was Art Deco. So only if you really, really, really love Art Deco would you appreciate that. Otherwise, you would be called quite a fool to not enclose the balconies within the windows. Our architectural project that we're doing right now, and I thought I'll put it up, is a building very close to Sassoon Docks. It's right opposite Theo's, and we had a lot of mixed emotions on that. Though we were commissioned to build a glass building because of our expertise in glass, but by that time also I had shifted focus onto being more sensitive to architecture in Bombay, and we realized that we could actually make an Art Deco building. Because the Art Deco building was a G+5 story, and this building was going to be a 42nd story building. So why just make a glass star right from the bottom? We could actually maintain the parking lot as the Art Deco area at the bottom. What I did was we took a lot of influences from what I like is the frozen fountain detail, which is on the right hand side, which you will see at the Oval Maidan or even at Fort. The building looked like the building on the left hand side, so it had these panels, and we tried to kind of use that in the parking window at the bottom. If you look at it, the glass building was inspired by Manhattan. When I say Manhattan, that's the best Art Deco precinct, but more so is because we stepped the building. Manhattan, as you know, was the entire buildings are stepped because one is because they make it look grander. And second is because when people were actually building the Manhattan buildings, they said that you wouldn't really get light on the road, and which is why they started stepping the buildings. And that's why it's all ziggurat, because everyone felt that when you're making these tall buildings, you wouldn't really leave light on the road. And that is why you have the entire Manhattan that's stepped up. And we kind of followed that at the rear side. But what really got us going is, so if you see, this is what we kind of did, took our inspirations and put it there. But we had a hell of a time. We had this session at World Trade Center with about 100 people who were tenants, and we started off explaining the plans, etc. And that was all okay. But when we came to the elevation of the building, we had a mixed bag. So we had about 60% agreeing that Art Deco is the way to go and stuff. But we had the remaining 40 who didn't want that old building to be anywhere on the new building. and after the whole session, they came up and said that, do you really need an Art Deco building at the bottom? I mean, what use is it going to be to us? We've lived in an Art Deco building for 40, 50 years and we really don't see anything great about it. And why do you want to go back in time and give us something that we've not really enjoyed living in today? So we had a lot of criticism, because though we sit here and praise Art Deco, we must realize that Art Deco came with a lot of criticism through the world. And even today, when you look at it from a different perspective, it will be criticized. My boss, for example, he's 93 and he grew up with Art Deco and he worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, and he kept calling it Art Faco, because he said that why are you so interested in an Art Deco building? It's total crap. And Le Corbusier, if you've heard, he actually gave the name Art Deco because he used it as a form of criticism. Because, you call an architect or an interior designer an interior decorator, and you must see the anger on the face, because you can't associate design with decoration. And everyone associated, all architects associated Art Deco with decoration than with design when it actually started. And it was more of a fun thing to do because of the war, because of the depression. And that's why when you see buildings in Miami, etc., you'll find that they're quite colorful. So not many people really appreciate Art Deco, though, we have a certain amount of people that will appreciate it, but a large number don't, and it gets very difficult to convince a client. Okay, so it's very good fun to read it, it's very good fun to see videos, it's very good fun to hear people talk about it. But when it comes to your own house, people do resist a bit, because they feel that, why are you doing this? Let's make something more contemporary. Let's make something more straight line. Why do you want to get into motifs? So yeah, it is a problem. So conservation is easy, restoration is easy, but preservation is the toughest. And when it comes to Art Deco preservation, definitely the toughest.
Thank you. And I want to actually take that question and bring it to Firdaus in a similar spirit, where you've, for example, you mentioned that the history of BFT is almost as old as the history of India. And so just, can you comment on BFT's role in the Swadeshi movement, and actually how that ties into deco, and how has your approach to designing these styles, and just design and production, actually evolved and adapted to the way our interest and engagement with deco has changed from then to now?
So when we started off, as I showed you guys, there were those replicas of the Minton tiles. But one really interesting thing was that in the 1930s, the growth of Indian architecture came through like Mistry and Bedwar, Master Sate Bhuta. Indian architects, Indian firms, no foreigners, who wanted to build buildings in a modern fashion, and they started using concrete and RCC. So you find like even the buildings started to show the curved balconies, which couldn't be done before. The speed of construction increased. Like even though now we don't associate these Art Deco buildings with speed, but compared to the earlier buildings, like they were much, much faster. So even Bharat tiles had to adapt to this speed, and the tiles that they produced were designed for speed of production. So for instance, terrazzo is a material which just requires stone chips in a binder of colored cement. And it's like maybe 3 times as fast to produce as the pattern tiles. So Bharat tiles also adapted to this by basically producing these mass-produced items. But what is interesting is that they collaborated with the architectural firms as well as the contractors. Like you find that there was a close collaboration between, say, for instance, Shapurji Palanji and Master Sate Bhuta with Bharat tiles, where they would basically tell them, you guys design the floors, we don't want to be bothered with this thing. You all make it fun and you all put your tiles inside, and there was this very high degree of trust. So kind of like the company started to adapt itself from the Victorian designs, which they basically cheapified from the British, to this modern international style, which probably was developed by Indian architects and interior designers in collaboration with the company. And so what's great about it is that this trend, what we're seeing, is still continuing today. I mean, today, Bharat Tiles has around 450 patterns, which are all crowd-funded. Okay, I mean, that's one of the points of pride that I take in my company is that people literally come with their designs, with their ideas, and they come and they want to design something unique, and that's something which we support and which in turn supports the company. So that's what I can say about the Bharat connection.
Thanks. So we've gone from the architecture and the facades and the enclosing of the balcony to the interiors now with the flooring. And actually now I'm just thinking, after you said the enclosing of the balcony as being something that's destroying an Art Deco building, and in my mind I'm just like, it's like throwing soup at a painting. This building is this like piece of art that's here, and we're just, anyway.
But I think we also have to realize that I think that the Art Deco period is one of those times when we had another revolution, which was that people started demanding bathrooms in their houses, attached to their rooms. Otherwise, I remember in my ancestral, in my ancestral home, which is Dina building at and Marine Lines, there was this long corridor with rooms, like almost like a hotel abutting the corridor, which were given to family members, and the toilets were right at the end. So it was still a very novel concept to have a toilet in your thing, which I think came about with Art Deco.
Okay. And I'm going to move this question now to go further inside into the apartments and into the interiors of the spaces with Akshay and his project with Sea Green Hotel. And if you can just take us through a little bit about your process, and also maybe think about why document deco now? Like, why is now a good time to preserve these archives and these histories and these memories?
I think I'm working on a larger body of work on Bombay, which kind of looks at different micro-histories. And I talked about the idea of this layering, this onion layering of histories in this city, which is kind of interesting because you can see Sameer's installation behind us, which kind of talks about the same thing, about how these different eras of Bombay kind of mix indiscriminately. So I was like looking at different eras and different stories I could tell. And this particular time in the history of Bombay is intertwined with this idea of deco. And this idea of kind of an aspiration, a dream, all of those notions come about. So I thought that how would I constitute one of these micro stories into a narrative? And I thought one way of doing it is the personal. And looking at where I am now as someone who doesn't live in Bombay anymore, visits the city and stays in these spaces, and at the same time looking at what stories do these buildings reveal, like some of which I mentioned in the letter. Different memories I had from childhood, different histories that exist in these hotels. For example, when I did the show at 47A, when I showed this work, when my mother saw it, she says, grandfather's friend, who was this music producer, Jaydev, when he got thrown out of his house in his last few years, he moved into the Sea Green Hotel for the last 2 years of his life, and I had no idea. So the kind of repetition of this idea of like stories and these ghosts. So these buildings become not, the architecture does not become just a shell, but to borrow an idea from, like say, some like B.D. Joshi, it's a habitat, right? And a habitat brings stories.
And now a final question, I guess, for all three of you is, we've spoken a little bit about how this architecture has gotten kind of subsumed into the eccentricities of the city, and how the city in turn has given Art Deco here its character, its legacy. And this might be a slightly big question, but where do we go from here? Like, what are some of the challenges we're facing? And we've already touched upon it through all of your individual contributions, but where do we go from here? What is an ideal way forward, if there is one, to try and preserve these legacies? And how can we as, individuals or citizens of the city think about how we can contribute to making sure that this legacy continues into the future? And maybe we can start with Nikhil.
I think it's very simple. I think awareness is key. The more people know about it, the more people start liking it, the more people will preserve it. I think there's no I think it's mainly aware, and I feel that the pandemic has made people more aware. I think architecture wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for the pandemic, because people wanted to come out and they wanted to look at buildings. They were fed up of reading it and seeing it. So, and that was because of awareness. And, I was reading an article the other day, and it said that all over the world, Art Deco is back because a lot of people, after the pandemic, have been doing Art Deco all over the world, because it's easy to do an Art Deco building. When you want to kind of compare it to a heritage building, it's easier to do an Art Deco. And when people want to go backwards, then Art Deco is the ideal style. And if you look at the ratios of Art Deco coming in, which also similarly happened, because Art Deco wasn't called Art Deco till 1960-70, it was called modern. So someone looked back into history and said, okay, we'll call it Art Deco. So I think now people are aware, so we might have a new style, or we might have Art Deco coming back, and everything is welcome.
That building in Worli, Avinya 1, what do you think?
Yeah, but I don't think it's Art Deco, but I'll have my reservations on it. Though I tend not to criticize too many buildings, but it's a nice modern building, let's put it as that. And it's a great marketing gimmick to put it as Art Deco, and it's doing fantastically well. Because it was on the spot. I lived at Worli as well when I grew up, and it is on the spot of a place called ST Office, on which the bus stop actually is. And ST Office, if I remember very faintly, was this dark green and yellow building, and I think it was Art Deco. Because, look, I was in school and no vision of Art Deco, but I know that it had this circular column at the edges. So I feel it was Art Deco, and that is why the developer said that we'll make an Art Deco building on it. But I think that's where it ends.
I think it's also interesting that the point that you made about Art Deco being a response to the war, and there's a certain playfulness and lightness to the way these buildings were made, in a way to bring joy to people who were living there, but also looking at it. And now that it's making a comeback after the pandemic, I wonder if there's some kind of subconscious correlation to that. But yeah. Okay.
So recently we developed a range of lifestyle products, and the designer came up. He said, I want to make a capsule collection because capsules are they're very trendy right now. And when he made the collection, I realized Art Deco. So Art Deco has steeped into our consciousness, and it emerges in some very interesting ways which you don't really consider. Like if I had told him I want an Art Deco inspired collection, he would have poo-pooed. He would have said, no, it's not trendy. But soon as it became capsule and the French were doing it, then of course it was very legitimate, and so I kept my mouth shut. I was like, Art Deco, it's great.
I mean, as Nikhil pointed out, RCC structures is something that we are still doing today, right? And then there's a nature of preservation. Art Deco is super trendy right now, and we have this great point where everybody is kind of in this zeitgeist moment around preservation of Art Deco. But I think we should also extend that conversation to older vernacular Bombay architecture and Victorian buildings, these kind of other apartments, which are kind of perhaps not even replaceable, because that style of architectural form or using wood or kind of those notions are going to completely disappear or cannot be reproduced. So it would be nice to have maybe an Instagram handle which looks at Victorian Bombay and so just Art Deco Bombay.
Bombay
and extend that, extend that, this kind of love for Art Deco, which I also share. And I have a sweet space spot for it, but we should also extend it to these other buildings that we also look and then ignore.
But thank you guys for such a great panel. The topic is Art Deco, so we're going to stick to that. But I think the job of us collectively is to make Art Deco cool and then make it relevant and make it omnipresent that it is. I urge everyone to go check out that stairway on your way out in the Lok Satta building. But thank you very much. I feel very cheated because I have many questions myself. So I'm going to suggest this. We'll do a 2.0 at Avid. We'll do another long workshop. First, we'll start with a walk with architecture. And then we'll do another panel and we'll dive into the conservation part which is what I'm most interested in, what, the citizens of Bombay can do for that. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Start and the wonderful team at Start, to the Kalagora Association, the wonderful team, and Avid Learning and the wonderful team. Kalagora starts today. The official launch is at 5:45 at Toss Maidan, so do go check it out. And it's open for the whole week till the 12th of February. Start goes on till the 22nd, so lots of culture to be taken in. Avid is also putting together a very interesting talk here next Sunday. It's on fantasy architecture, so the architecture theme is continuing, so urge you all to come there for that. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful weekend. There's lots of cool culture stuff going on, so hope you all get to see many of it. And you can ask the panelists some questions now for a few if you want, but stay tuned. You'll all get an email about that next workshop we are planning. Thank you. Thank you, guys.